Okay, I've got my coffee, I've got my pen, and I've got my trusty notebook. Today I want to show you some techniques which I find really helpful when it comes to coming up with a film idea which might just be a keyword, or it might have been given a theme. It's a difficult place to find yourself when you're sort of thinking of all these ideas come to you from a keyword or a theme. It can be difficult to sort of narrow something down that's not cliche, hasn't been done before, and that you're going to find interesting as well to bring forward. So I'm going to set myself a challenge and show you the ways that I go through this. Now, the purpose of having a pen and paper is really because I think using the analog technique to begin with gives you a bit more freedom than just going straight onto a computer and smashing out a treatment. So the whole point of coming up with ideas and being able to generate ideas is that they can come from anywhere. You could be sat in a coffee shop, you could be sat at home, you could be sat on public transport, or you know, and that's the point, that you can just pick up a notepad, pen and paper, and you can just start putting things down, jotting stuff down. And so I'm going to show you some techniques which I find really helpful. If you find them helpful, excellent. If not, then maybe you'll find your own sort of technique from looking at this. But today, you know, that's what we're going to look at. So thank you very much, and let's get started. Okay, so I'm starting off with the theme. I'm going to give myself the theme out of time. So this can be a challenge. I immediately, upon being given the theme, can think of lots of ideas which could be potentially made into a short film. So out of time obviously brings with it lots of connotations and denotations which we could apply straight initially to a short film idea. So the idea now, from going from the theme of out of time, what I like to do is start off with keywords. So these keywords are words which I would associate with something being out of time. So you've got keywords like lateness, timekeeping. So you could keep going from here. You could continue to write keywords down. From this, what I tend to do is choose a word from the keywords which I'm going to take forward, but also keep it as try to be as non-cliche as possible. So I'm going to try to look at clock watching. Now you're probably thinking, well, that's pretty cliche in the concept of being out of time. So we usually have a character who can't follow their appointments. And I think, thinking of these cliches, the comedy genre is usually the genre which these two cliches are found within. So I'm going to try to avoid comedy. Not only is it very difficult to execute anyway, but I think that that's the most cliched genre for these two areas. So what I like to do from here is start to ask myself rhetorical questions that we can come back to later. So I'm just going to put, is the audience aware? So now I'm going to think about my genre. So time running out. Now I'm telling you to avoid cliches, but sometimes a cliche is necessary to backfill some of the story which the short film doesn't have time to actually reflect and show. So obviously we've got horror genre, time running out. Again, at the moment I think of the horror genre and time running out, it makes me think of Saw films, and again the cliches which surround horror films where there is something about to expire. Kind of sort of swaying towards is sci-fi. And again, the reason for that is I'm trying to think of something as original as possible and avoiding all these influences that surround us with films. So I'm thinking of sci-fi. Now obviously at this point feasibility is a big thing. I want to make this short film on a low to no budget. The film will be in a parallel present, and due to budget, and immediately I'm starting to think of films and TV shows which stay within this feasibility, like Black Mirror as a TV show example. Keeping the audience unaware, I'm going to now move on to another keyword, and I'm going to put it environmental. So environmental, I'm sort of narrowing down my parameters at this point, and I'm going to put a line through this because I know that I've now reached sort of an area of development. So I'm going to write some keywords down. Running out of things. Water, air, fire, land, electricity. Water is one that's covered a lot in sci-fi films. The protagonist running out of water, we need water to survive. So there's always lots of representation there. So what I'm going to do is select one and think differently around it. And this is another good practice. So every film that you watch which has tropes and cliches, a good exercise I like to do is watch a film and imagine how it could have been shown differently, and sometimes you realise then the reason why the filmmakers have chosen to use a cliche. Cliches where electricity runs out, so usually this happens in film after a natural disaster. Okay, so now I'm back to the theme. I've got my sub-story that there's going to be something to do with electricity running out and solar panel, and solar power. So, in order for solar energy, for us to run out of solar energy, there has to be the sun. So the sun is now going to play a factor into this short film. Now the cliches regarding the sun and sci-fi films are that the sun runs out, but that we know from recent news reports wouldn't happen for millions of years, and we want to keep this to a parallel present, as if in this parallel future the sun has already been replaced. So I've created some more rhetorical questions, but I'm going to work with this, and I think these questions should be the questions that the audience is asking themselves but not distracting themselves too much with. So remember, out of time is the theme and not necessarily the storyline that we're going for. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to think about a plot which revolves around these areas, and at this point I'm going to start thinking about even more parameters to set myself. So I'm going to try to set myself that this film has to be under 4 minutes. Okay, so as you can see from the last time, it'll only be a couple of seconds on the video, but I've spent around about an hour just adding some extra details to the wider film universe. So in order for me to really get my head around the concept a little bit more, I found it really helped to sort of plan out the entirety of the universe that the character sits within. In a wider sense, when you're watching the special features of DVDs or you see director interviews where they're specifically asked a question regarding something that's happened in the film which isn't necessarily seen. So it's always good to know your film really well, so that it helps. I always find it helps with your plot development, character development, and sometimes can make you sort of reevaluate the way that a shot's going to be told. So I started to toy with this idea of how would it be feasible, how would it be possible for the world to always be lit up. So I've done a little drawing of our globe as it is now, with the light from the sun and then half of the globe being cut off, obviously because they're having night time, and then as the sun travels around it swaps over. So in the film concept, just some concept art that I've come up with here, there would have to be sort of 3 reflectors that bounce off each other almost, so that the Earth is always covered in sun. So obviously with the notion of the world always being lit up, I started to think from a biological perspective what couldn't exist. So I've got plant life, trees, grass, flowers, obviously because photosynthesis can't take place because they need night time for photosynthesis to take place. The solution for this would be that there'd be forest-wide locations around the Earth, around the globe, which are in darkness, which aren't sort of covered, the overlap areas where the reflection potentially isn't as bright, or where, a bit like you can see here with my artificial light, the shadow that's been cast by objects, there'd be a similar sort of situation where forests would potentially be sort of created in the shadow areas, and then they would experience night and day as normal. Farms and houses would have sheets, automatic sheets that block the sun, so that this allows farmlands to be grown and gardens to exist without the grass being completely burnt. Keeping on the questions for me to research, how would the Earth not heat up? So I looked into reflectors which don't reflect heat, so the passive reflection. So this could be some formula that the massive orbiting reflectors are made out of. Then I thought about UV and sunburn. Obviously, if the whole globe is lit up by the sun on a continuous basis, that's going to increase these. So I looked at researching things which we have currently in technology. So tint for window tint, which has UV and UVB reflector prevention layers, and an article that talks about how these auto tints block 99.9% of UV rays. So that was an area I looked into. Obviously, would need to be done in more depth. So this plot is going to be around a single character who's narrating about how the Earth used to be bright, but now it's going to be told in total darkness. The plot will take place after the time has run out, so the audience is unaware that the time has run out while this narrative's happening. The narrative's going to create an enigma in the audience, and as they're narrating, flashbacks over the character's narrative will take place, and the finale will be to feature the character in a kind of like non-linear fashion. The character at the end, I've got this vision that the ending will be quite poignant in the sense that we'll finally see the character lit up in their sort of present tense as they're looking up at the sky, which is sort of got this ember-like glow of the reflectors cooling down in the sky, because they're obviously at night time at that point. So naturally, from this point, I need to now start creating a script. So once I've got my treatment, I could rewrite this into a proper treatment, but I've essentially got my plot, and that's what's going to move on next. So from this, I'd try to flesh out my first draft of a script, which sort of has all of the plot in one linear script, which sort of plays out how the film would play out, and that's when I can look at whether or not the scenes which I've planned in my treatment will actually be feasible and transpire well on the screen. Hopefully you found this to be a good exercise for you to practice. I must admit, while sort of penciling this concept out, I had to pencil out a few other ideas. I had another similar film concept to this where the character is instead waking up at 6 p.m. and the audience is seeing them conducting themselves, creating the links that this person probably not works nights, but in actual fact this person, this time to this person is the start of the day, and then as they build up their daily routine, it'll become apparent that the world is always switched on, and that the dilemma will come in the form of they're at work and suddenly everything becomes darkness. So that is a completely different film idea to the film idea which I've penciled out in front of you here. And again, that's quite viable to be two separate film ideas, even though essentially they're both stemming from the same premise. And sometimes, you know, that'll just be something that naturally happens, so don't be afraid to write stuff like that down. So that's the end of this video. And we'll do some more potentially on script drafts later on. Thank you very much.